Hello and welcome to another new fic. This time we are reading It Hurts to Hope by Inquilitori on AO3. Chapter 1. To Trap a Watcher. He's been running for so long. How long is unknown. The void works in strange ways. But he knows that it's been long enough that his energy is drained, and the sharp pangs of hunger are stronger than he's ever felt. Well, no, not ever. There were days on end, sometimes weeks back there, where he'd had nothing to eat, to drink, and he'd beg for something, anything, because his stomach felt like it was trying to tear itself apart from agony, and black spots danced in his vision, making him lightheaded. The memories threaten to overwhelm him again, and he shakes them from his head with as much energy as he can muster. He's barely a shadow now, slipping between worlds and under code like the sneaky rat he is. If he had a mirror, he's sure that his reflection would be nothing but a ghost, a phantom of his previous self. Better than what I was. The bitter thought punctures through the haze of his brain, and he jerks forward again, wings instinctively spreading, even though there's no air for them to catch on. Here in the void, it is everything and nothing at once. Inky blackness punctured by small pinpricks of light. He knows it's a risk, but he opens his eyes and looks. Skimming over swabs of void until they finally land on the one thing in this eternal abyss that strikes fear in his heart. They know he's watching them. Feel his eyes upon them, just like he can feel theirs. "Where are you, little one?" they sing, and some part of him is desperate to reply, to guide them to him. "Come home to the Watchers, Zelqua." It's the name that snaps him out of it. The name that had been forced upon him, and the name that he'd never chosen. It isn't his, but it's the only one that he knows. Zelqua lets out the smallest sob he dares, and severs the connection, closing his eyes and stumbling forward again. He can't do this much longer. Run much longer. Because even though Watchers are powerful, they can't withstand the void for very long. And Zelqua has been in the void for a long, long time. How long? The thought spreads through the thought spears through the fog in his brain again, but he doesn't allow himself to dwell on it. He knows that the longer he stays in the void, the more he risks his health and safety by being exposed to it. He has to get out. Find somewhere safe to hide, preferably until the Watchers stop searching for him. A single-player world, perhaps? Where he can layer his code into the servers and be as undetectable as the wind. The feeling of being watched rushes over him, and his breath gets caught halfway in his throat. They're so close! He can practically feel them. The wrongness they emit. The wrongness that connects them to each other. Here, in the void, with nowhere to hide, Zelqua knows that he might as well be dressed in neon colors and singing at the top of his lungs. He's never felt this exposed in his life. Time is running out. Soon they'll be close enough that watching won't make a difference. And they'll bring him back with them, no matter how hard he fights. Zelqua grits his teeth and pulls at the very dregs of his power. What he finds terrifies him. Void traveling takes far more than he thought, and the last scraps of his energy are barely enough to propel him towards the nearest surfer. He can't even check what it is, which is the most dangerous part of it all. He could land in a public server set to creative for all he knows. But there's just no time. He can practically feel their breath on his neck, though he still isn't sure if they have to breathe. And their ringing voices in his ears. Searching for the server, Zelqua latches onto the code and pulls. It rips easily under his power, but there's a resistance that surprises him. This server has a powerful admin, which doesn't bode well for him. There's no time to choose another one. Zelqua draws on the very last pieces of his energy and tears through the server's code, mutilating it beyond belief. Established shame rips through him. He knows that given more time, he could do this seamlessly, sliding into the server with such ease that the admin would never even know he was there. But right now, he can feel his limbs shaking and eyes watering, and breaths coming in rapid bursts as his energy drains from him at an astonishing rate. The Watchers won't be able to tell where he's gone once he's in. They're far enough away that all they'll be able to tell is that he entered some kind of server somewhere. He prays to whatever gods that can hear him that they won't find it if they look. With one last rip, Zelqua slips through the tear he's created and into the server. Far, far away, a lone figure was hunched over his latest project in his base, until the sudden and unexpected pull of something shattering in the server code hits him like a punch to the gut. Exuma lets out a strangled cry and reaches out to brace a hand against the wall. Even as the other instinctively pulls up the server code, watching in horror as it's ripped apart by uncaring hands, torn and shredded until it's big enough to let something in. It doesn't physically hurt per se, but Exuma still wants to scream when he sees his precious work be torn apart and cast aside. Work that he knows is practically airtight. No normal player should be able to hack into his server this easily. And yet there it is, a big tear big enough for a person, a mangled hole that will take ages to patch up. The tear itself isn't that big, and in fact there's something almost desperate about the unraveling of the code. But Exuma doesn't care, because a haze of anger has descended upon him, and it isn't leaving any time soon. Of course he knows of the Watchers. Who doesn't? Cruel beings who can walk between worlds and manipulate code, who can see everything, and who tear apart servers for their own sadistic humor. They would take players and change them, leaving their worlds behind in disrepair. Only a Watcher could tear through a server's code so easily, especially a Voidwalker's code. Only a Watcher could rip it apart with such disregard and slip inside, completely uncaring about the disaster left behind. Exuma knows that the disaster is just about to begin, and it's that thought that spurs him to movement, lunging for his chest while desperately fumbling with his communicator. When he first became admin of Hermitcraft, Zuma had made a promise that no hermit would be harmed under his protection. He would walk through the Nether and back for each and every one of his players, and he would feel safe with knowledge that they would do the same for him. And now there's a fucking Watcher on Exuma's server, and he isn't going to let it hurt his players. Zelqua falls to his knees the minute he materializes on the server, pulling in ragged breaths of air that feel wonderful after the stardust of the void. He simply stays there for a minute, gulping down breaths of cool, fresh air. The first real reprieve that he's felt in Who knew how long? But urgency is pushing at his mind and his feet, and he finally staggers up again, wings spreading to catch him as he looks around the place he spawned. It's nothing but a grassy hill, seemingly untouched by players' hands. But Zelqua can see even without opening his eyes. The distant rise are what are definitely buildings, seeming too big for a simple multiplayer. Some kind of hardcore nuts? Or perhaps it's simply a creative server. Zelqua prods at the server rules experimentally. Nope, completely normal survival multiplayer. What kind of survival player built something like that? Even without being close, Zelqua can tell it's impressive. A ding at his side distracts him, and he registers that the server has automatically equipped him with a small rectangular box fit with a keypad and screen. Ah, he knows what this is. A communicator. He hasn't held one in his hands for so long. The last time... No, he won't think about the last time. He gingerly takes the device into his hands, peering down curiously at the words that scroll up the screen. Zoomovoid. I'm calling code red! Zoomovoid. Everyone, get geared up. Impulse SC. X, what's going on? Zoomovoid. There's a watcher on the server. Zoomovoid. Tore through the code like paper. False symmetry. Oh my god. Zoomovoid. Someone get to spawn in case it's there. We need to find it now. Zelqua's numb fingers let go of the communicator, and it topples down into the grass. They know he's here. Though really, he shouldn't be surprised. There's a gaping hole in the server's code. And even the most faulty of admins would have felt that. But the fact that they're trying to find him so fiercely does come as a surprise. Until he vaguely remembers the reputation that Watchers carry. Oh, Void! All he wanted was somewhere to hide so he could build up his energy and keep running. Not the manhunt with his life on the line. He has to move, get further away from the buildings. He doesn't know where spawn is or where most of the players would be, but he decides that wilderness equals safety. And he heads further into the forest after collecting his communicator to make sure he can stay updated on the inhabitants' whereabouts. Before fully disappearing into the woods, he gives himself once over to see how he's doing in terms of physical shape. Admittedly, he isn't great. The robe he's been wearing since his escape is creased and dirty, torn in several places, and speckled with void dust. His wings, great dark things that shine purple in the sun, are clumped and matted, nothing like their previous shine. Lifting a cautious hand to his head reveals that his honey brown hair has grown out, tangled, and almost reaching to his shoulder. He doesn't want to think about anything else, and instead runs into the woods. He doesn't want to think about how the last time he looked into a mirror, his once dark eyes were a glowing purple that matched his wings, and there was the broken portal mark on his forehead. Instead, he buries himself further into the woods, praying that no one will come out here. The gods decided his prayers aren't enough, because mere moments later, Zelqua hears the inexplicable sound of something firing before two people shoot above the treetops, and he throws himself into the nearest hiding place he can, wings wrapping protectively around him as he trembles. Players can fly now? When did that become a thing? He knows that some players are hybrids who inherited traits from animals like birds, but he also knows that avian hybrids are exceedingly rare, and how can there be two of them? His frantic train of thought is interrupted by the sound of someone stepping through the underbrush, obviously trying to be quiet, but failing miserably. Great void, Cleo. You're louder than Mumbo's redstone contraptions. A distant male voice says from outside Zelqua's hidey hole, and he feels his heart stutter a couple times. Shut up, Etho, a second voice snaps, this one brasher and definitely higher pitched. It's not like we're trying to sneak up on the thing. Well, the element of surprise would definitely help, the first voice, Etho, says, but relents to his companion's comment. No, I know. We're just supposed to get eyes on it so we can relay its position back to X. Zelka shuffles slightly in his hiding spot, wondering how hard it would be to slip out and make a run for it. He doesn't fancy the idea. He doesn't fancy being caught by these people, but he likes the idea of staying here even less. He crouches down and tries to scoot around a log, freezing when his wings brush up against a branch and make it rustle. I hate being out here, Etho grumbles, and footsteps so light they're barely hearable hit Zelqua's ears. I mean, I practically grew up on horror stories of these things. You know, single-player worlds could be terrifying sometimes. The prospect that something could just tear through the code and take you, and no one would ever know. Don't worry. Once we find it, this will be all over. The second voice soothes. Zelka was pretty sure Etho had called it Cleo. He moves a little more and, emboldened when his movement isn't noticed, tries to rise into a half-standing position to get bearings. His head pokes out from behind the tree he's hiding behind, and immediately makes contact with a mismatched pair of black and red eyes. The owner of the eyes is an abnormally spindly young man with a shock of white hair and a mask covering his lower face, a bulky jacket tossed over a black turtleneck. He wields an impossibly large axe that he nonetheless handles with grace, swinging it from hand to hand with fluid motion. The motion freezes when he locks eyes with Zelqua, and the panic that makes his eyes go wide is clear and palpable. Zelqua can practically taste his fear. The man's companion, a woman with sickly skin and fiery red hair, turns to him with a concerned noise. Etho? She questions and follows his eyes straight to Zelqua. Etho might have frozen, but the woman moves. She has a crossbow in her hands before Zelqua can even blink, and suddenly there's a bolt flying for his head. Zelqua lets out a scream that rivals a bird's cry, and dodges out of the way, feathers fluttering to the ground as his back crashes into another tree, the arrow embedding itself in the bark where his head had been moments ago. Silence rings through the trees as the woman, is that Cleo? Tries to load another arrow, and Etho stares at Zelqua, fingers twitching on the handle of his axe. Zelqua does the only thing he can. He turns tail and flees. Hey! The shout is immediate and loud, but Zelqua doesn't dare look behind him as he bolts through the trees, panic and fear singing in every step and frantic heartbeat. I'm gonna die here. I'm gonna die! I'm gonna die! After all he's done to get away, and he's going to get skewered on an arrow, or on an axe blade. He can hear the duo crashing through the forest after him, all attempts at secrecy thrown aside as Cleo screams at her companion to let X know whoever X is. Zelqua decides he doesn't want to know. His heartbeat is a fluttering bird in his chest. His breasts he breathes panic gas. His breaths, panicked gasps that just barely managed to squeeze out words, prayers and pleading to no one in particular, a futile hope that only wastes breath. They're getting closer. Cleo tanks her way through the forest, and Zelqua can hear her efforts growing louder as she gains on him. But he doesn't hear another pair of footsteps that could belong to the man named Etho. Zelqua wonders if he should worry about that, when suddenly a lithe form drops from the tree in front of him and he skids to a stop. Whoa, hey, slow down! Etho tells him in a warning tone, raising his axe into a defensive stance. Zelqua, despite his efforts, feels his wings slowly lift around him as a low hiss builds in his chest, an effort to make himself appear stronger than he is. Glowing eyes blink open in a halo around his head, though Zelqua has no need to look, and they're simply for intimidation. It seems to work to some degree, because Etho's already pale face turns even whiter, and his hands contract in a death grip on his weapon. His back foot shifts like it's considering trying to run. Zelqua takes the moment of hesitation and bolts into the trees, eyes winking out and eyes winking out and wings shuddering close again as he tries to make himself smaller, less of a target. He can hear them shouting behind him, words that fly past his head along with another arrow, prompting him to try and run even faster, even though his legs are already screaming with the effort, and his lungs hurt, and his head is swimming, and overboard if he could just spread his wings and fly. Fate has a cruel way of twisting things around, and Zelqua's next step has nothing underneath it. He teeters for a moment on the edge before gravity eventually gets bored and pulls him down, 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 until the unforgiving ground rushes up to meet him. He doesn't even have the energy to spread his wings. Jacob fell from a high place. The minute he pops back into the world, Respawn doing its job to mend his wounds, he knows he's in trouble. Voices rise around him, and even though his eyes are still adjusting to the respawn, he abandons all concerns and sprints in the first direction he can aim in. Wings already spreading, ready to lift him up and let him escape this hellish place he'd somehow chosen to save him. Someone's hand grabs the edge of his wing in an unforgiving grip, and Zelqua crashes back to earth with a cry. Eyes clearing just in time to see a figure above him, blocking out the sun. Instinct kicks in and he rolls away, somersaulting into a crouch and raising up his arms, purple aura bursting to life as he summons his powers, prepared to fight. But he used all of his powers just to get him onto the server, and the magic around his hand sputters and dies. He pulls back again because just maybe he can slip back out through the tear he made, back to the void where the Watchers are. But he's pretty sure he prefers the Watchers to this place. He's trying to slip back out through the code. Someone's voice warns, and an arm is pulling Zelqua up, wrapping around his chest and restraining his arms. He screeches like a wounded animal and beats his wings, desperately thrashing in the person's grip as the purple rims his vision, panic heavy on his tongue because he's trapped again, no way out. In one last desperate bid for freedom, Zelqua opens his mouth and bites the arm holding him. Hard. The person the arm belongs to yells out in pain, and immediately their grasp loosens, leaving Zelqua to squirm free and try to make a run for it. Walls rise up in front of his vision, and he skids to a stop in front of a sheer blockade of stone. They've walled in Spawn, knowing that if he died, he would come back here, and there would be no escape. Breath ragged in his throat, eyes wild, Zelko turns slowly to face his executioners. A snarl rises from his throat. He isn't going down without a fight. There are at least 10 people, all decked out in dark gleaming armor and impressive weapons. It flickers across Zelko's mind again. The wondering of how rich these survival players really are. But he decides this isn't important because he's most likely gonna die in the next 5 minutes. Wings flaring wide, Zelko bares his teeth at the closest person and sinks into a defensive stance. Before he can do anything, though, an arm wraps around his waist again, this time pinning his wings in place as something cool is shoved against his lips. He realizes that what it is the minute the potion hits his tongue, and he tries to spit it out. But a hand against his chin yanks his head up, unrelenting as he's forced to swallow or risk choking, the sedative already rushing through his veins and turning his vision fuzzy. As his wings slump and he falls backwards, or would have if someone hadn't caught him. The last thing Zelko can make out before the potion pulls him under are 2 pairs of eyes, watching him with caution. One green, one brown. Then there is nothing but dark. And that is the end of chapter 1.